Okay, so welcome everybody and happy holidays. This is been a long year and a good one for LIAPG and hopefully for all the participants here. Um, as you can see from our statement there, we are an open organization and, encourage participation and people to show up. Um, and we really, we like to have lots of participation. So, little business first. And the first thing we always like to do is thank our corporate sponsors. And you can see their logos here. There's 13 of them or so. And thank you so much. Your support keeps this organization going. Um, and the corporate sponsorships also allow for multiple members of the company to be members of LIAPG. And, we thank you and we hope that you will return in 2024. This slide shows the current officers and board members of LIAPG. Like I said, we're an open organization, so we meet monthly. And going into 2024, our meetings will be on the first Wednesday of every month. So that correlates with the 3rd of January. We have them both via Zoom and in person, depending on people's availabilities. And there's one change that'll occur is that after many years, I am stepping down as president and switching roles with Regina Bykov. You can see she's been VP, and that'll be the change for 2024. And I am very, very happy and pleased that Regina is willing to step up, and change is good. She's going to bring new ideas and leadership to LIAPG, and we're going to continue to grow and remain vibrant and providing, relevant services to our members. So thank you, Regina. And the last thing on this slide is that we do have a job posting page on our website. It hasn't seen a lot of activity in the last 6-8 months, and I would encourage anybody on this call, if you're in a role or know of your company hiring and you'd like to post here, we'd like to see that get a little more play than it has. So as far as upcoming events go, our Zoom and quarterly dinner meetings usually are on the third Thursday of the month, excuse me, and we're intending to have quarterly in-person dinner meetings in hopefully March, June, September, and November of the coming year. We don't have a speaker for a webinar in January. We do have plans in the works for one on the 15th of February, where Mr. Andrew Clift of the New York State Museum will do a presentation on ESO-GIS, which is the Empire State Organized Geologic Information System. That's still coming together, but look for announcements. And we'll also be publishing our schedule of other events. We have some field trips in mind coming up. One suggestion that we had that might have some really interesting geologic features is the New York Botanical Gardens, and we thought that might be a great event when things really come into bloom in the mid to late spring. And as always, the appeal goes out. We are always looking for speakers. It is one of our challenges, and it would be great if we could see folks step up and volunteer to do some. If you don't like public speaking in front of a group, you can certainly do a webinar. It's a little easier. But we like to have varied, rich, and relevant content for these, and providing PDH credit hours is an important function for all of us who are PGs. Other organizations, we always like to remind people that there are a number of organizations within New York State. Obviously, we've got the New York State Council, and then we've got the other 3 regional organizations, Buffalo, Central New York, and Hudson Mohawk, covering the various, localities of New York State. There's also the Northeast chapter of the American Institute of Professional Geologists. If you're looking for good content, presentations, webinars, all these associations do them. The New York State Council just had the Geology Days conference, which I'm sure many of you attended, and it was a was a great event. It went really well, and it certainly the second year in a row, it's beginning to really develop a community and a sense of belonging, and we had a good time. Also, the Pennsylvania Council of Professional Geologists, if you go to their website, you'll see that they are actually quite a busy organization and offering all kinds of things that you can participate in and learn a lot of things. Lastly, there is more locally at Stony Brook University. Um, they have in the spring and fall semesters, they have a geology open night lecture series, which is currently done both in person and online. I suspect that if you go there right now, there is not a schedule for the spring semester, given where we are at the holiday season, but it's something really good to check out. I know Jennifer made a few notes in the beginning about participating here since we're on a Zoom. If you are seeking PDH credit and you paid for that, there's a couple of ground rules that we need to follow to satisfy the requirements of the state education department. You know, the first and foremost, you have to be here and pay attention for the whole time. That is something that was discussed at the Geology Days conference, and the state education department, I don't know, they may or may not be on this call right now, but auditing it to make sure that we are complying with the requirements and granting the PDH credits. We have obviously in Zoom, there's a chat function. And as Jennifer said earlier, if you're present and you are seeking PDH credit, you need to identify yourselves in the chat window. It shows most people by their name. But if it says iPad or iPhone or, Jim, that's not satisfactory. We need you to say it's, Chris Wenzel and I'm under, iPhone. We also will be asking some questions along the way, and especially at the end, there's a few quiz questions that you need to respond to. That chat stream goes into a text file, and we use that along with the Zoom function that documents when you join the call and when you leave the call. And with that, we can verify that you were present for the entire presentation to satisfy those requirements. So thank you in advance for, for helping to make sure we're able to do that. With that, I think that that's time for the main event, and that is this presentation called Green and Sustainable Remediation. It's a program overview and case studies presented by Evelyn Hussey of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So if you could please give her your attention, I think this is going to be a great talk. I've seen the slides and they're cool. We're gonna take one little break here where I stop sharing and Evelyn starts, and then we'll proceed.
Okay, just while they're getting set up, since we do have 70 people on this webinar, we're going to ask that you hold off your questions until the end to help keep it going smoothly. Thanks.
Okay, Evelyn, we are seeing your screen. So you can just kick it off when you're ready.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Because there are so many people, I am going to leave my video off to try to save my bandwidth a little bit. All right. I really appreciate you guys inviting me today. I've done this talk once before, and before I took it over, Janelle Gaylord, who you might have talked to or heard from, was giving these talks. We have been talking about GSR for a long time, both in DER and just generally, but it does feel like the focus has increased in the last couple of years. And from talking to people, it does seem like there's a lot of questions and clarification that is desired, especially because there are a lot of updates happening to our policies and to the guidance. So like you guys had said a few minutes ago, actually, I know there's a recent presentation at Geology Days about GSR that was hosted by an engineering firm. And they were covering that kind of from an external point of view. And what I'm going to try to focus on here is more of the view and perspective of DER and DEC, and talk more about our programs and the guidance that's available, and then go through a bunch of examples of how GSR has been implemented. So with that, sorry, I'm getting used to Zoom, my apologies. Oh, it went faster than I thought. Sorry about that. Okay. Really quickly to summarize what I'm going to go over to try to give you an idea. I know that this topic can feel like there's a lot of different pieces that don't necessarily kind of cohere super well, but I'm going to go over the policies and the guidance that exists that DER has put out, the DEC has put out, and that New York State has put out. And then, because this is a question that comes up a lot, I will go through the updates that are being made to those policies or that have been very recently released, because I know that a lot of times maybe it gets missed or something when something comes out, and I want to make sure that we're on the same page with that and that you guys are aware of everything. Then I'll go through some of the technologies and best management practices as an example. And then I'll go through how we like to see things tracked in items that are provided to DEC and DER for review. And after that, I'll do the fun part. I'll go through the implementation, and then I'll go through a bunch of examples and case studies. I tried to have at least one case study for each phase. A few of them I have more than that, but I'll talk through some investigation, implementation examples, design and construction, site management, and site reuse. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about climate resiliency at the end of that, because it didn't fit super well anywhere else in the presentation. The big question first that we have to get out of the way is, when we're talking here about green and sustainable remediation, or GSR, and I will use those terms interchangeably, what are we talking about? One issue that I've seen is that there are a huge number of terms that are referring to pretty much the same thing. But at DER, what we've done is we use green and sustainable remediation as that blanket term. When you're looking at other documents, some EPA documents, other documents that maybe engineering firms have put out, you might see greener cleanup, green remediation, sustainable remediation, life cycle analyses, environmental footprint analyses. But DEC currently defines GSR as the practice of considering all environmental effects of remedy implementation and incorporating options to minimize the environmental footprint of cleanup actions. When we define it like that, the other thing that I want to be clear on before we jump into this presentation more fully is what the footprint analysis means. Footprint is usually quantified by estimating different things like the waste generation, greenhouse gas emissions, and other waste materials, pollutants that are generated, water use, things like that. But they also extend beyond the site and include the footprint of imported material, of landfill disposal, and of energy production off-site. So having given you the definitions, I'm going to get into the guidance. I apologize for how dry this is. There aren't very many pictures that go with this, but I'm going to go through the DEC and New York State guidance and policies that are currently available. The current overarching policy goal is that We want to be powered by renewable energy by 2040 and have an 85% decrease in emissions by 2050. At DER, the big policies are DER 10, which is our technical guidance for site investigation and cleanup. And it covers some broad topics in GSR. The biggest thing to remember about DER 10 is that we want to make sure whenever we're doing anything here that GSR is not a reason for a no action or a lesser remedy. It's intended to improve on a selected remedy and to reduce the environmental footprint while maintaining protectiveness. I'm having some issues scrolling here. In addition to DER 10, our specific green remediation guidance is DER 31, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and CP 49, which is climate change and DEC policy. There's also a couple of state level items, the EO 22 state emissions and the 2019 Climate Act as well. Going through this one more specifically, we'll talk about DER 31 in a little more depth. This is discussing the current iteration of DER 31. DER 31 establishes the expectation of proactive consideration of green remediation techniques and the proactive application of those techniques to all phases of the work in existing and in future cleanups. When we talk about the DER 31 green remediation, we want to make sure that we're considering all these concepts. Generally, we want to be looking at reducing direct and indirect greenhouse gases and other emissions. We want to be increasing the energy efficiency and minimizing the use of non-renewable energy. We want to conserve our resources and effectively manage our resources and materials. A big one is going to be that we want to look at reducing waste, increase recycling, and increase the reuse of materials. And then as we move through the different phases, you want to make sure that you're maximizing the habitat value and creating habitat and fostering green and healthy communities and working landscapes. We also look to prioritize making sure that the end use is considered during the remedy and encouraging green and sustainable redevelopment. CP 49, this one is climate change and DEC action. This expects us to assess our policies on a regular basis and also generally minimize the greenhouse gas emissions across the economy. It encourages us to seek opportunities to further reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of our operations. And for projects in floodplains and areas that are vulnerable to storms, we want to consider having a written climate resiliency plan. So those are the big things that we're going to talk about. But like I said, things are getting updated a lot now. So I want to go through briefly what those updates that are coming down the pipeline look like. DER 31 was originally released in 2011, and it is currently in, the update is in internal review. I'm actually working on this, and hopefully it will go out for public comment next year, which is in only a week. The main updates that are anticipated to be included in this are more guidance on incorporating GSR, more guidance on quantitative footprint analysis, more guidance on the implementation of the best management practices, and more guidance on how to report and document the GSR in all phases of the remediation. You'll notice that each of these bullets says more guidance, not providing guidance. All of these items are currently in DER 31, but we are trying to expand on them and make them clearer. I know there are sometimes questions about that. So that is what we're one of the things we're trying to address in the update. The other thing that is being updated right now is DER 10, which is the technical guidance that was originally released in 2010. And that is also in internal review and expected around the same time to be released in 2024. The other updates that I wanted to mention are that there is an updated SMP or site management plan template, which was released in May 2023. And there will be a language change in the certifications that engineers sign on their documents starting January 1st. So in about a week. And that will be expected across most forms. The change in the language will be that DER will be listed after DER 10 in the certification language. So you're signing that you follow DER 31 as well. Anticipated updates and templates, we are expecting an FER template to be released somewhat soon. And the last thing that I wanted to make folks aware of on this talk is that, just so that you know, DEC websites have migrated to a new host. I just want to mention that because you may see that websites change. All old links should work, but if for some reason you're having issues, just be aware that that migration happened in mid-November. Oh, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that there is an electronic BCP application that you should be using at this point. That was released a few months ago. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different technologies and BMPs because a lot of the guidance that we provide does call back to especially the BMPs and also to green technologies. So I want to take a few minutes to just kind of talk about that. First, when we say BMPs, if it wasn't already clear, I'm talking about best management practices. In specifically the green remediation space, we're talking about the BMPs for greener cleanup. There's quite a few available. I called out a few important ones. There is an excavation and surface restoration BMP. There is one that EPA has, and there's also some additional information and guidance from DEC. EPA also has a guidance on site investigation and environmental monitoring and materials and waste management, and EPA and DEC both have guidance on pump and treat systems and soil vapor extraction. And again, there's a lot more than this, but these are the ones that come up a lot. And there's also the ASTM standard for greener cleanups. All of these are available online. You can look them up on the EPA website or the DEC website to read about these best management practices for the greener cleanups. And the reason I wanted to talk about the BMPs is because the thing that follows from those are the BMP analyses. These can be implemented very quickly and without or before a footprint analysis is completed, which is a more intensive process. In a BMP analysis, we're looking to evaluate the concepts and the tools that can be used to reduce the environmental footprint of the activities associated with remediating contaminated sites. So when you're doing this, you're really just applying these best management practices to what you're doing. These should be research based on the stage of the remedial program and what exactly you're doing so that you can pick the right ones to apply. Critically here, I do want to say each work plan that is provided to the DEC should include a discussion on identifying and selecting BMPs that will be implemented during the work. And again, all of these can be found online. Lastly, a brief mention of some technologies. A lot of the language that we use talks about applying greener technologies, things that we're thinking of when we say this. Solar powered treatment. Sometimes I solar powered camp units, lower carbon concrete. And another thing that should be examined is whether there are site conditions that can be taken advantage of to reduce the energy use. A couple examples of that would be trying to avoid active pumping by using the artesian conditions for hydraulic control or phytoremediation. And those aren't going to necessarily be applicable to all sites, but it's definitely something that we want to see considered. There's a lot of stuff that is worth taking a look at just to kind of see what's going on, see if things can be applied. So we've talked about the laws and policies, and I've covered the concepts in the BMPs. So now I'm going to do the part that I get a lot of questions about, which is assessing and tracking the GSR concepts. And I'm going to go kind of broad to more specific here. First up is doing a climate resiliency evaluation to identify site vulnerabilities. When we assess the vulnerabilities of a site, we're looking to evaluate the remedy's exposure to climate or weather hazards. So perhaps whether the site looks like it's going to be subject to more flooding. We're also looking at the remedy's sensitivity to hazards of concern, hazards that might reduce the remedy effectiveness. Once you've kind of done that more broadly, we're going to look at the metrics and footprint analyses. We are looking for quantitative analyses of the footprint. These can be completed using a standard procedure or method. There's a few different programs available. You should be doing direct comparisons between alternatives in like an FS. Identifying things that can help to reduce the footprint. This data presentation, the analysis should be shown in the work plans, and then the data collected on the footprint should be presented in the report. When I say that the data should be presented, I'm talking about tracking items and then reporting them out. For at least my sites, which are mostly state superfund, I'm looking for the daily inspection report to include tracking of items like reducing truck idling. Generally, you're going to look at the green remediation specifications. Once you're in construction, this is a big one, you're going to be completing the Form A, which is the summary of the green remediation metrics. And when I talked about that new SMP template, that does include a section on green and sustainable remediation, and it talks about green and sustainable remediation in the standard PR. So we're going to be looking for that as well. So now we get to look at some pictures and examples. So this should be the fun part. It won't just be dry white text on a blue background, at least mostly. What I'm going to do is talk broadly, and then I'm going to go through each phase with some examples and how to implement, and hopefully it will be informative for everybody. But first, I did want to bring up this fact sheet that was released. It's the DC guide for implementing GSR in project life cycles. I like this one, and I wanted to bring it up because it does go through each step or phase of a remediation, from site characterization, where your green and sustainable remediation items might be things like reducing the mobilizations, to the feasibility study, where we're looking to include the GSR in the remedy selection. In remedial design and remedial action, you're looking to incorporate all those BMPs that we talked about. And then in the periodic review reports, you're looking to do things like assess whether the engineering controls should be updated with respect to climate change, and include your GSR summary metrics in the PRR. Again, this is available online. So now I'm going to start with the site investigations and feasibility studies and talk a little bit about how those can be implemented. Starting off, just generally when you're doing the project planning, you want to have a robust conceptual site model. That would hopefully reduce the need for future sampling, reduce the need for future mobilizations. We want to have local providers or local analytical labs where possible. Another thing that you can implement is the use of non-invasive technologies, passive sampling, and in all phases, but especially here, you want to look at your waste management and reduce your investigation-derived waste. Minimize the need for single-use items when you can, like plastic bags. And when you can, and when it's appropriate, you want to look at disposing of your items in the municipal waste. Okay, there we go. When you put together an RIFS report, an investigation and feasibility study report, we're looking to have included the GSR practices where they're applicable in the remedial element descriptions. Consider GSR in the alternative analyses. Present quantitative analysis using an acceptable program. This comes up a lot, including a climate vulnerability assessment where it's applicable. I know that those can be a lot, but those should be included here. You want to include consideration of EPA's best management practices, kind of review those, which ones might be applicable, put those in. And a big one is when you're putting together your feasibility study, consider the potential end uses, whether you can have a greenway, a pollinator habitat, something like that, where it's appropriate. The figure here is just showing some of the things that you can consider. And this is what some of the output looks like from some of those programs we talked about, or that I mentioned. The case study here, this is one of my sites. I'm project manager for this site. It's out in Rochester. It's chem sales. This one, as all sites do, has a little bit of a complicated history, but we did a supplemental RIFS in the last couple of years, and the report for that included a full in-depth analysis of the GSR elements included as an appendix. It also included an evaluation of the remedies based on the GSR elements, and included things like how to minimize waste, lower the emissions, reuse materials. Also included a summary of the best management practices that might be applicable. And all of this was described in the alternatives analysis. Again, the figures here are some of the outputs that were put in that appendix. They show, I am sorry, these are very, very tiny. But it assesses each alternative in terms of things like the PM10 emissions, the accidental risk of injury, and the electric usage, which at this site is blank because we didn't anticipate any electric use. But this is what a way to present the GSR evaluation can look like. Once you've got that RIFS, you're going to be looking at the design and construction phases. In remedial design, all of the GSR stuff should build off of the activities that were evaluated in the RIFS. Should always be following the best management practices that are available from both DEC and EPA. when possible, the remedial design, my apologies, should specify the use of cleaner and more energy efficient equipment and more energy efficient and cleaner construction techniques. When it's available, the remedial design should specify the use of locally sourced materials and should incorporate, and this one's big, automatic shutoffs and remote sensing in the treatment systems. Another thing that you can include are alternate uses of power, backup generators, renewable energy, things so that maybe if there is an issue on the site, it reduces the need for people to hop in a car and go out there and check on everything. And also hazard preparedness, considering whether a site is susceptible to climate change and designing around whether there are concerns to increase the resilience of the remedy. When we're looking at construction, this is building on the remedial design, but implementing all of the GSR items that were specified in the remedial design. It's very, very important during the construction phase that the tracking and reporting requirements are completed so that Form A, continuing to follow those BMPs, things like as simple as reducing vehicle idling, making sure to use low sulfur diesel, making sure to use the most energy efficient equipment that's reasonable. And the other big thing is reducing the need to haul material off-site by reusing the material as backfill if you get a beneficial use determination. If you're not familiar with those, you can reach out to me and I can give you a little more, but that allows material to be reused as backfill if it's appropriate for that. Our case study here is the Old Erie Canal. This site did a number of things that were specified in its design and then completed in its construction that were really great for reducing the CO2. One of those, sorry. One of the things that was implemented at this site was the use of rail to transport the waste material to a disposal facility. When that use of rail, as opposed to trucks, was analyzed, it was approximately a 70% reduction in CO2 emissions. This site also had bank armoring to increase its resistance to erosion. And the backfill and topsoil were sourced very locally. They were about 8 miles away. And this site also took advantage of materials that were generated during site prep. So the wood that was cleared from the site to restore the site once the construction was completed. Another example is Adirondack Steel. This is actually very close to my office. I visited this site a few times. This is another one that used rail to reduce its CO2 emissions when it was analyzed, and compared the rail use to the truck use. It reduced the CO2 by about 70% again. And it also was just better for the roads there. So in this situation, if they had used trucks, they would have been having to go in and out on this relatively local road. But when the rail was used instead, it really reduced the amount of truck traffic on that little road there. Last one for this section. This is Old Upper Mountain Road. This is out in Buffalo, in the Buffalo area. It's in Lockport. This one, one of the things that was considered was the end use. Everything was designed around the end use. And the climate vulnerability was assessed very early on to make sure that the remedy was very resilient to any sort of climate change. The construction used a lot of locally sourced materials. It used locally sourced rock and soil, and actually the some of the like piping and blocks that were used to divert some water were also very locally sourced. The thing that I want to draw your attention to here is that the GSR implementation was actually tracked every day in a report that was sent in during construction, and it was also rolled up monthly into a nice summary that could be reviewed by the project manager. And that's what this sheet here summarizes, is how that GSR implementation was tracked every day. So for example, the core elements were tracked as what would be impacted, and the score, and this is all color coded. Again, it's very tiny. I apologize for that. But these scores and data that were collected daily were summarized and reported, which was really great for our tracking. Oh, I lied. There is one more in this one. I also wanted to mention one that's down closer to you guys. This is Zeus Fastener. This one was designed with climate resiliency in mind. The creek bank was armored really extensively. All the wattles and matting that were used were biodegradable and were great for the erosion control. And again, the wood waste that was generated during the clearing activities of the site was reused and mixed into the sediment when that sediment was placed. The backfill was also locally sourced for this one, and the restoration that took place at the end took advantage of native plants, and it actually created a living classroom for the local students. This backs up right near a school, and the kids can actually go out and study species of little critters and stuff that are present on the site. These photos show the transition. The one on the far left is what it looked like at first. In the middle is during construction. And the end is this beautiful native plant restoration that has taken hold there. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about site management. There's sort of an idea, and I understand very much where it comes from, that once the site is in site management and the remediation has been completed, there's not really any GSR to implement, but there definitely are some things that we can discuss here. First of all, we are looking for the site management template to be used, and this is that new contractor certification that I discussed way back. This is what we're looking for you guys to sign off on, and you can see the bottom line here. It says DER 10, DER 31, and CP 49 policies. All management practices, or all management activities, should use GSR BMPs. Again, things like not idling your truck when you're on the site unless you really need to because it's freezing, which happens. When daily reports are submitted, they should track and report green and sustainable remediation practices. And like I said, those ICEC forms include DER 31. Another thing is we do have a lot of sites in site management that have been previously remediated. So when we're looking at those sites and maybe not exactly going back to them, but as we're continuing to monitor them, there may be sites that need a climate vulnerability assessment. And that is definitely something to look at as you're working on sites that are already in site management. So the first case study here is Lawrence Aviation, again, down closer to you guys. I'm sure some of you have heard of this site. During site management, there was an upgrade to a groundwater treatment system. The upgrade was mainly that it was moved to geothermal, which offsets a pretty significant amount of CO2. But there was also some green infrastructure put in place around the treatment system. This system was designed to blend in with the neighborhood and not be disruptive. It's very well insulated, so it's much less energy intensive to keep the system at the temperature that it needs to be to operate. And then when that house, well, not house, but that housing was put in to blend in with the neighborhood, things like a green driveway were put in. That's what this picture is all the way on the right, to allow rainwater to percolate through the driveway, reduce runoff. And all of these are things that can be considered if you're doing site management upgrades at very minimal or no cost, or at an overtime cost reduction. So if you switch to geothermal, it might have a pretty expensive price tag starting out, but over time, less so. Another case study, this one is out toward Buffalo again, the Shirley Chisholm State Park. This one has some similar things that have been implemented, like the driveway walking area that allows rainwater to percolate. And the treatment system has been decorated in a way that is pleasant for the community. Walkways and benches have been put in this park. So this is one of those things where it was kind of designed with the end use in mind, and as it's been in site management, things have been implemented that are along the green and sustainable line. So like that driveway that lets rainwater percolate. Another one for site management. This one is a BCP site, and I wanted to bring it up because I know I personally work mostly on state superfund, but there's kind of an idea of like, well, what do we implement on a BCP site? And this site, there are a bunch of wind turbines that divert a bunch of CO2 and a ton of solar panels that also generate a bunch of power for a little over 600 homes. And that's an example of something that was completed at a BCP site. The last thing that I had said that I wanted to mention when we talk about implementation are those remedial system optimizations. And this kind of goes along with the site management idea. When you're looking at site and site management and you're looking to optimize the remedial systems, we want to see the same items included in this that we see included in the earlier design that we talked about. So include GSR concepts and make sure that you implement and track just like you do in construction. And again, at this time, it may require a climate vulnerability assessment if that hasn't been completed yet, and it might be vulnerable to climate change. A site where we did one of these is Kessman Landfill. This is, if you ever take the Amtrak up to Albany, you might go past this one. It's in the Great Swamp. This one needed to have an optimization completed because there was some concern about contamination with PCBs in the swamp. A climate vulnerability assessment was completed because it's in the swamp. It's very vulnerable to increased rainfall, flooding, things like that. GSR concepts were incorporated into the design and construction. Things like berms were actually in some places made with straw bales. The containment areas for some of the soils that were excavated were made with straw bales and then lined rather than those concrete bollards that are sometimes used. The other big thing at Kessman was that the local wildlife was protected during the construction. This site has some protected turtles that could have been present. And at all points during the construction, they were basically on turtle patrol. They put up an exclusion, like barrier for the turtles, but then they had to make sure that there weren't any turtles within that before they did any work on the site. And they didn't find any of the protected turtles, but they did get out quite a few snappers and some other turtles there, and a few frogs, and I think a snake possibly. And this one isn't quite done yet. I believe they are in the process of planting back native vegetation and making sure that that reestablishes next spring, now that the excavation has been completed and the soil has been placed back. This is another, these figures are another way that the data can be presented when we talk about hazard scores in our vulnerability assessment. This is what it looked like when it was presented for the Kessman landfill. And I want to talk a little bit about the implementation of climate resiliency. We're going to go back to Zeus fasteners here. At this site, because it's in from the coast a little bit along a little inlet there, you can kind of see that traced out. There's a concern now that sea level is rising and storms are getting stronger, that stronger and more frequent storms would impact the site and flood it more. This was assessed in a pretty extensive report, and this figure shows major storms and then what happened during Sandy. And yeah, so this one, it's just another example of assessing vulnerabilities to flooding, what's expected versus what has occurred and what might happen in the future. And kind of tying into that, sometimes things happen that we don't necessarily expect on our sites. At Tioga Casting, the Susquehanna River rose about 50 feet. It flooded over a half-mile inland after Hurricane Irene in 2011. This is actually one of the things that prompted identification of sites near floodplains. The cover system was kind of like pushed by that flooding and had to be repaired. That's what this photo shows here. Kind of working on fixing that up after it flooded. All right. So with that, I'm going to go through a few questions. And then if you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask them in the chat. But overall, when you're working on a site, make sure that you evaluate the stage of the project that you're in, what green and sustainable remediation can be applied in line with DEC policies. Think about what you can reasonably implement. And please do check out all of the guidance that's available. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. If I don't know the answer, I can probably find the person who does, and we can try to help and clarify things for you if you're not quite sure. So with that, I will go ahead with those questions. So what is the green remediation DER policy document number? I think you guys can type it in the chat. We'll give you like 5 seconds. It is DER 31. Next question. What is the form that you have to fill out during construction projects? Give you guys like 10 seconds, 15 seconds to type out an answer. Okay, the form that you fill out during the construction phase is the Form A. And now I'm going to do a couple of true false, or I'm going to do a true false. True or false? Rail, sorry. Rail can reduce CO2 generated by transport of materials. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that one. And the last true false I will ask. GSR cannot be incorporated into site management, true or false? That is false. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and ask.
Okay, I'll start off with a question. So this new SMP template is going to be active in January 2024. If you already have a site that is looking like it's going towards closure next month, like I have 2 of them, am I going to have to rewrite my SMP to meet this new template, or do you think some leeway is given there?
The SMP template, I do not believe is expected to have an update. It is the certification language that is used at the beginning.
Oh, just the certification language. Okay. That actually leads into another question. It's the contractor certification. Is it the actual contractor performing the work, or is it more of a consultant certification?
Oh, I apologize. It's the consultant.
Okay.
I just
All right.
missed it.
All right. If anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask away.
I'm not sure if any questions came up in the chat. If you guys do have any questions, you can also put them in the chat if you don't want to shout them out.
Hi, this is Gerlindy Wolf from Ramble. I have a question about assessing green and sustainable remediation within feasibility studies.
Mhm.
Is the DEC more interested in seeing like GSR language incorporated across all of the different assessment criteria where it is applicable? Like, you know, like language kind of sprinkled in under each of those sections, or would it be better or more beneficial to have, you know, environmental footprint or sustainability be considered as like an additional separate balancing criteria in that evaluation?
That is a fantastic question. At this point, we look to have GSR incorporated into each balancing, or sorry, discussion incorporated into each alternative analysis. And it's not exactly like a balancing criteria, but it can be kind of incorporated in that way.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is like talk about it under each of the different assessment criteria, like short-term impacts, long-term impacts, implementation, that kind of thing. Sprinkle it in under each section where it's applicable.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can also include the full analysis as an appendix.
Sure.
A full analysis.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
we have a question from Quinn Roche. Do sites in OM&M phase have to perform a footprint analysis?
Good question. I think it kind of depends. There are definitely sites, for example, a site where it might only be a cover system, where performing a footprint analysis is just unnecessary and excessive. But for a lot of other sites, you would want to perform a footprint analysis. Does that answer the question?
I think it answered it for me. So another question from Stephanie Davis. Where can we find the CIFA, SCFA, and site-wise programs?
You should be able to just grab them right online. Those are just some example programs that I've seen people use. And you should just be able to find those right online.
Okay, we have a question from Jessica Phillips. How is GSR scored against remedial design?
Okay.
I can expand on that question if you want me to. Just thinking out loud, like an excavation, a dig and haul, is going to have a higher greenhouse gas emissions versus an ISS. So when you're doing that comparison, how are you scoring the levels of, of the greenhouse gas reduction?
So overall, the priority is going to be to implement the most protective and effective remedy. So you're not going to ever be making a decision to do a lesser remedy based on GSR. In terms of doing something like a hog and haul versus an in situ, like ISCO or something, you would really just want to make sure that the GSR analysis is presented in your feasibility study, and then once the decision is made on what remedy is going to be implemented, then you're going to select the best management practices that apply to the selected remedy. Does that help?
I think so. I'm just, I was wondering if there's like a scoring level, like if it's going to be 50% of the score is going to be how, if reducing greenhouse gases would be, make a certain remedy more effective than another.
Yeah, so again, once you're in the design phase, you're going to be looking at what best management practices can be implemented. When you're doing the feasibility study and presenting different options, that would be when you would include different GSR analysis. I'm not sure if that made it any clearer, but
Thanks.
Okay, we have another question from Richard Baldwin. Would you need a BUD for reuse of backfill materials on the same site? I usually just get the DEC PM's approval based on analytical data.
I believe you would want to get a BUD, but I will check on that.
I have had the same experience as Rich, where usually we're just getting the approval based on the data, and we're only doing the BUD if we're going off-site. And hopefully that's not changing.
No, actually, you're right. I'm sorry. I was thinking of a site I have where it's two sites next to each other. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Are there any other questions?
And the group got quiet. Well,
All right. Well,
that-
if anyone has any further questions, again, I'd be happy to answer them or find someone who can. And for example, the question that just came in about GSR and tax credits in the BCP program, I will need to look into that and get back to you because I am not sure off the top of my head.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd actually be interested in the answer to that one as well.
yeah.
Okay, I will copy that one out into my notes and find out.
Evelyn, that was a really great presentation, and we'd like to all thank you for that, making the time and doing it for us. We sincerely appreciate it. So thanks.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope you all have a great evening and happy holidays.
Same to you and everyone else. Thank you so much for coming out and making this a great night. So you all take care.
All right, goodbye.